Hello to my accelerated Foundations of Education class. So I am your professor, Dr. Jones. I decided to do my introduction outside because it's such a nice night, and also just to show a little bit about how I'm dealing with all of the changes that we're being forced to adjust to. This is also my doggy, Smokey, another way that I am coping with all of the changes. So I wanted to respond to your questions to me and also talk a little bit about what this class is going to be. So this Foundations of Education class is definitely different from other ones that maybe your friends have taken or something like that, because in my class I like to focus, and especially in this accelerated class, I focus on how power and culture have played very significant roles in how our education system came together. And I do this for a very specific reason. And it's because most people, when they think about, what they think is wrong with the education system, when they think about why they want to dedicate their lives or want to do something positive in education, they usually think about inequity. They usually think about inequality and racism. And what this story does is kind of show you the background of it. Lots of people like to talk about systemic racism, and this story is definitely showing you all of the ways systemic racism is baked into our education system. And so I started you off with last week. You were reading about Native American educational practices. You were reading about the different colonies. And I like those to start us off. One, the reading about Native Americans definitely talks about how their education system was directly related to the role that they had in their society, and the role that they would have to play as an adult. And that's not different from most other cultures, especially pre-colonial cultures. But then we look at the colonies. I asked you to look at the differences between northeastern, middle, and southern colonies. And if I could summarize those things, I would say, when you look at the northeastern colonies, they really make up what so many people consider to be like American culture, where there was mostly Anglos. You're going to hear the term Anglo-Saxon a lot, and that basically just means people who are from England, people who are from like Germany sometimes. And those were the early colonists. And so because they faced a lot of oppression around their religion in England, when they came over here, they wanted freedom of religion. And so that's a major cornerstone of American culture. And they also, within that freedom of religion, literacy and learning was very important. And so a lot of our culture also comes out of that. But it's important to look at all of the things that go into American culture. And so that's where you can kind of pick up also from the middle colonies and the southern colonies, where in the middle, you read about how those were very, very diverse populations with different people that shared a religion, shared language, shared a background, culture, kind of stuck to themselves in separate places, and had their own schools, had their own traditions and stuff like that. And so that definitely says something about American culture, about how people of different faiths, different backgrounds mix within the culture. And it's also important to think about the southern colonies. Now, the southern colonies, with many of them, the people that colonized that land, they were in debtors. They held debt in England and other European countries, and they said, hey, we'll let you out of jail, we'll send you over to the New World, and we'll give you some land, and you just got to work that land. And so that's a very different way to come into American culture compared to the New Englanders. One, one thing that you did see is that the economy, the way of life in the South, it was based on these farms, these plantations. It was based on slavery. And they didn't really have a need for a system of education, as we see in the New England colonies, where they had to set up some sort of education because they wanted to practice their freedom of religion. We didn't really see that in the Southern colonies. And on top of that, and something that you're going to learn a little bit more about this week, is that education and literacy in particular had a big danger to the system that was going on in the South. They were making lots of money on slavery. It was driving not only their economy, but the economy of the whole entire country, or what would later become our country. And they knew that education could disrupt that balance. It could disrupt that balance with poor whites, and it could definitely disrupt that balance with African Americans, enslaved Africans that they were holding. And so it's important to kind of keep these origins in mind as we go forward, talking about the story of how our education system came together. So here's what I can promise you about this class. There is a lot of reading. I can definitely promise you that. But at the same time, the reason I told you not to buy a book is because I know the readings that I've picked for you are the best for really showing you this side of the story. The book that they had picked out for this class tells a certain side of the story. I really wanted to tell you this side. And so in that, with all of the reading, I can also tell you that it will be worth it. If you trust me, do the reading, answer the questions. I'm really going to guide us through this story that eventually will get to our own experiences and how our experiences with power and culture and education directly connect to these people that we're learning about. A little bit about me. I did my PhD at Emory University. I focused on the history of education, and specifically the history of Black education. And you will see in this class, it is heavily weighted towards the history of Black education, and that's for several reasons. It's not just because these are my favorite stories, though they are my favorite stories. It's because through the story of the history of Black education, we can see so much about how education has been formed for literally everybody. Like, I am not exaggerating when I tell you that the school that you and me went to, if we went to a school that was anywhere in a former slave state, was directly impacted by African Americans and directly impacted the policies, definitely impacted how our education came together. And so it's weighted towards the African American story, but that is for a very good reason, because that tells us a very substantive story about how our system works. I showed you my dog. Basically, in this quarantine, I'm coping by trying to spend some time outside, which is why I wanted to do this video outside, spending some time with my dog. And most of all, what's been most important is, allowing myself the room to adjust. And so that's what I hope you guys are allowing as well. So what's important going forward this week, you're going to be diving into some of what I think are some of the best stories about the history of Black education. You're going to be reading, you're going to be reading about how before the Civil War, where it was illegal to teach even free Blacks to read and write. So it was especially illegal and came with lots of horrible punishments for enslaved people. And you'll read about how even despite all of that, enslaved people risked their lives, risked so many things in order to get the chance to develop their minds. And that's important. And you're also going to see lots of connections between education and freedom, education and identity, And I definitely want you to be thinking about those questions, because that's what's going to help us really understand the importance of education and the importance of understanding this perspective of it. You're also going to be reading about how post-Civil War, like the first thing that formerly enslaved people asked for was a system of education. And that is something that predated everything else. That even in New England, where they had these the school system, they didn't have a systematic system that formerly enslaved people were asking for. And so that's significant. And so that's just a little preview of the important things that you're going to learn in this class. I'm going to try my best to find ways to really draw us in and help us have the discussions that are going to help us understand this. Keep in mind that your blog posts, your discussion questions, make sure you read through all of them that I post on the blog, and answer all of them, because I want to see how you're really thinking through it. And so it's going to take you really showing me, well, this is what stood out to me. This is what I think about it. This is what it's making me ask questions about. So I encourage all of that, but definitely write as much as you can. That's going to help us the most. And so I hope that you guys are all well and taking care of yourselves. You will hear from me more. And you obviously are welcome to ask me any other questions, and I'll try to address it in my videos. But you guys have a great evening or great day whenever you're watching this. And I look forward to these next few weeks going through this story with you.